Welcome to 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act Virtual Pilgrimage. My name's Reverend John Borthwick, and I'm the minister here at St. Andrews in Guelph, and I'm inviting my community on a virtual pilgrimage through this book by Bob Joseph as a way of engaging and continuing to seek to do the work of justice and reconciliation, of truth-telling in our relations with the Indigenous community. And so this week we're on number 5 of the things that we need to know about the Indian Act. And this one is yet another real challenge. It's not surprising that Bob titles this section of the book, section 2 of the book, Resistance is Futile. And he quotes both John A. Macdonald, Prime Minister of Canada, first one, way back in the 1800s, and he also quotes Thomas King. And I'll just share these two quotes just as a part of engaging in this number 5 of things. So number 5 is, could expropriate portions of reserves for public works. So here's the quote from John A. Macdonald that he uses. And again, this is, the language here is telling. When we say things like, this just happened, these were mistakes, we didn't realize what we were doing, listen to the words of the first Prime Minister of Canada as he talks about what he calls Indians. John A. Macdonald says in 1885, "We have been pampering and coaxing the Indians that we must take a new course. We must vindicate the position of the white man. We must teach the Indians what law is. We must not pauperize them, as they say we have been doing." And you literally have to breathe when you read such things. And then Thomas King, related to this 5th thing, speaks about it in this way as an opener. Land. If you understand nothing else about the history of Indians in North America, you need to understand that the question that really matters is the question of the land. And that's from his book, The Inconvenient Indian, A Curious Account of Native People in North America from 2012. Thomas King, a Guelph author. Do check that out as well. So in the Indian Act, what it basically said when it was established in about 1876, all the way until the current version of the Indian Act, it basically says that the government has the ability to expropriate reserves, like lands that we already talked about, people were going to be moved and pushed, and this is where you're going to have to live. But then where you're living could also be expropriated for pretty much anything. Of a public works project, the government has a project, a corporation has a project. At any time, they could just come along and expropriate pieces of land. Now, within this, maybe there's some compensation, but even in a larger scale, if they decided that whatever project, whatever public work was going to be needed to go through or move into a specific area that was already established as a reserve, they could also decide to move the reserve. So, can you imagine, first of all, being forced to move from where you were living to another space and place? They said, you can stay here. Sometimes we refer to it as ghettoizing. We're going to move you, and this is where you're going to live, and you have to stay in the confines of this area, and it's specifically related to the Indian Act. You have to stay in the confines of this area if you want to be defined as an Indian, as we define it and as we tell you who you are. So not only have you gone through the upheaval of being moved away from perhaps your traditional, your ancestral, the land of your grandparents and beyond, now you're being told you have to live here in a space that you did not choose. It was not a place of your own choosing, and this is where you're going to live, and this is where you're going to have to stay forever if you want to stay an Indian. You get there, you move in, you try to, put your stuff up in the way you want it. You're starting to get a sense that maybe, as much as this is a difficult and a horrible transition, I guess you have to live with this if you want to live in this space and be here. So, okay. I'll settle in. I'll call this home. And not too soon, not too much later, comes along the same people that moved you in this place and said you had to stay here. Now they're saying to you, yeah, so there's this other thing coming through, there's a project happening, and so what's going to have to happen is this home that you're currently sitting, it's going to get torn down, and you're going to have to move again to another space. Or we're going to take over this chunk, and we'll give you a few something, just as a way of saying it's, here's a little compensation. Or we're going to say, yeah, the place that we stuck you in for this amount of time, yeah, you're going to have to move again, so get your stuff, and we're going to move you to another space because you're kind of in the way of these important things that we're trying to do. And just to make it just a little more challenging, in many cases, almost all cases, when it's around a corporation negotiating for to expropriate parts or to put a train through or to put some kind of public works project through, the players at the table is the government, the same ones who created the Indian Act. It's possible in some cases that Indigenous communities were able to be at the table, but the true negotiators are the corporation and the government. The same ones who created the Indian Act, the same ones that put this clause in the Indian Act that says that their land, the land that they were forced to go to in order to maintain their status as defined by the government, they are going to be the chief negotiators to say whether or not you're going to stay on your same land. Yeah. Thank you for joining me for the 21 things you may not know about the Indian Act, and hopefully as you're learning and I'm learning along the way, we'll see more and more why the Indian Act has been such an intentional way of disrupting and taking care of, to use the words of the government at the time, the Indian problem, and why it's had such a legacy and continues to this day create so much disruption, so much challenge, so much hardship for the Indigenous community across our country, and why we need to seriously advocate that something about this be not just reviewed or revised, but repealed and changed completely. We need to create a completely different way of having a relationship with the Indigenous community in this country. And it's going to take creativity, and it's going to take a lot of hard work, a lot of truth-telling, some justice, and reconciliation. Thank you.